We are the Association for Child and Adolescent Mental Health, or ACAM for short, and this is ACAM Learn.
Hello, and welcome to the Mind the Kids podcast. I'm Clara Faria. I'm an academic clinical fellow in child and adolescent psychiatry here at the University of Cambridge. And today I have the pleasure and the honor of receiving a very, very special guest in our podcast, Professor Andrés Martin. Professor Andrés Martin has many, many roles. He is the Riva Riella Ritvo Professor in the Child Study Center at Yale University. And he is also the medical director in the Children's Psychiatric Inpatient Service, also at Yale. And not only that, but he's also very famous in the child and adolescent psychiatry medical education world, and he leads several initiatives. And it's a really huge honor to have you today, Professor, to talk a little bit about global child and adolescent mental health.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I just wanted to start by asking a little bit about your journey. So you did your psychiatry residency in Harvard, and then you moved to Yale later on, and where you assumed your current role as a professor. And did you always want to pursue a career in child and adolescent psychiatry?
The story certainly starts before that. I'm originally from Mexico, where I went to medical school. And even as I started medical school, I knew that I was going to do psychiatry. That was pretty clear to me. But I had no real notion about child psychiatry, no expertise in it. And I bumped into it serendipitously during my years at Harvard. And once I had those early experiences, I pursued it and never looked back. And there were two experiences in particular that make me make the decision. One is that I had the incredible fortune of bumping into Professor Donald Cohen, who at the time was the director of the Child Study Center. And he showed me a world of child psychiatry that I didn't know. And the other thing, which is perhaps more important in terms of generalizability, something that anyone can do, is that I went to the annual meeting of the American Academy of Child Psychiatry. And once I did that, I found a community that I haven't left since. So that would be a strong recommendation for anyone interested in child psychiatry to go to ACAP or to SCAP or to any of these organizations.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I went to ACAP actually last year. I went already knowing I wanted to go to do child and adolescent psychiatry, but I was really amazed by the incredible community and encouragement that are to resident future applicants. The programs really come together for people who are interested in child and adolescent psychiatry in the US, and you get to talk to program directors and to people who are currently doing their fellowships in child and adolescent psychiatry. It is really fantastic. And you've mentioned then that you had this meeting with Donald Cohen, and today you kind of champion a really amazing initiative called the Donald Cohen Fellowship, which is held by YACAPOP, another international child and adolescent psychiatry organization. You made a speech that really, really imprinted in me about the generation from generation legacy and how it's important to keep that legacy going. And I was wondering, was that something that Professor Cohen instilled in you, the importance of mentoring the next generation? Or was it that you were so thankful and so marked by his own mentorship that you wanted to bring that forward yourself?
Yeah, no, those are excellent points. And I'll address them in reverse. Maybe I'll first tell you about Donald the person, and then I'll go back to Donald Cohen, the initiative. So Donald the person was a observant Jew, and he had a real Talmudic scholar's mind. But one of the things is that he brought this notion of from generation to generation, which in Hebrew, ledor vador, they're beautiful words, from generation to generation. I'm sitting one floor above the Donald Cohen Auditorium, and at the entrance of the auditorium, there's a plaque that says ledor vador, from generation to generation. He was very keen on passing on not only knowledge, but care, expertise, you name it. And one of the ways to doing so was through mentorship. He said, I'm misquoting him in some way, but he said that the only way to survive, at least in part, is through our mentees. And the only way that our work can endure is through our mentees. Again, this idea of from generation to generation. When we collected his selected writings into a book that was published by Yale University Press, the title that Professor Robert King and I gave the book is Life is with Others. Because this notion, not only of transgenerational, but across generations, that this is all a team sport, and we need to be involved in the care of children and youth as a team. We can't do it alone. I could go on and on, but I think that gives you the flavor. And two ways in which we have concretized this idea is through two very different mentorship initiatives. The first one was the one in Yakapap that you mentioned, Yakapap, the International Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Allied Professions, of which Donald was the president at maybe 25, 30 years ago. And after his passing, he passed in 2001. Shortly before 9/11. And by 2000, just some months after that, we had the support of Yakapap to do this mentorship program in his honor. This has continued for the last 24 years, continuously every other year at the meeting. The last one was in Rio. The next one's going to be in Hamburg. And it has become a centerpiece of the meeting where we have between 20 and 30 scholars, child and adolescent psychiatry, psychology, allied professors, young people who are starting to build their career and form these groups of mentorship that have been very powerful. And I'm so delighted that you were part of this experience. You're now part of a group of close to 1,000 who have gone through this. So we did that, and it was such a success that we replicated it, not for child psychiatrists or trainees, but for medical students. In 2002, we started a program here at Yale, in which we were trying to brainwash, if you will, medical students to go into child psychiatry. Donald was a Yale medical student. He then did his training at Harvard, his training in child psychiatry, but he was a Yale medical student. So that was the population that we targeted, because we know that there's such a dearth of child psychiatry applicants, or not enough. There's not a dearth, but there's not enough. We could always do more. And that program was so successful that I won't give you the whole story, but by now I'm happy to tell you that we have 14 programs across the country. They're not all called Donald Cohen. We're funded by the Klingenstein Third Generation Foundation. And there's 14 programs. 3 of them are named after Donald, the one in Vermont, the one in Boston, and the one in New Haven. But all the programs are about how to excite medical students about this field, attracting them into the field, attracting them into research and all sorts of academic opportunities. So going full circle from generation to generation, these are 2 efforts through which we keep Donald's legacy very alive and well.
Wow. That's really fantastic. And also, just for our audience, because we have lots of early career listeners and lots of international people as well, the Yakapap program, it is open to child and adolescent psychiatrists, but also trainees and psychologists that work in the child and adolescent mental health realm around the world. And usually the applications open 1 year before the Congress, which is next year, actually. It's going to happen in Hamburg. And it is a great opportunity. Like, I really vouch for that program. And just like this podcast is not about Donald, it's about you, but because your trajectory is so intersected with his, and because one of the things, well, as a former Donald Cohen fellow, I benefited so much from the program. And basically, like, you were coupled with usually two mentors, and you have these mentorship group-based activities. And I remember that one of my mentors, Maria, she's a professor of child and adolescent psychiatry in Brazil, and she actually visited the Yale Child Center when Donald was alive. And one of the first things she said in the mentorship was like, and then she spent a year as a fellow in the Child Center after came back to Brazil. And then she said, like, she was so impressed and so she was so impressed by Professor Cohen's work, and he was such a big name at the time that she had just got married, and then she decided that her honeymoon was going to be in Yale, New Haven, and then she told her husband, "We're going to Yale," and then he said, "Okay, fine," that's how she spent her honeymoon basically. And I think if that's not like a really cute anecdote of like the power of the Child Study Center.
That's great. Yeah. And I didn't know that story about Seiza, but we remain friends, Seiza and I. And so all these connections continue over time. There's an accrued interest over time.
Yeah. And what I wanted to ask you is, well, because like yourself and like Professor Cohen, like some leading people in the child and adolescent psychiatry field, they're both academics and also clinicians, and the balance between both can be hard. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about like your own journey through this academic clinical career, and if like, because I know now for audience as well, there are designated programs, like what we call them research tracks, both in the US, also in the UK, which is the program I'm at, that we're very lucky and privileged to have protected research time. But I've always wondered, how was it back then? Did you have protected research time? And did that influence like your later work in the SONIT program, Yale nowadays, where you lead a program that, well, it's dedicated to nurturing the next generation of clinician academics in our field?
Yeah, no, that's another very good question. Maybe one place to start is to say that you have to live life moving forward, but you can only make sense of life looking backward. So that's kind of a tension that we humans deal with. And I say that because if I tell you my story, my scientific progression story or career progression story from where I am today, I have many years to look back and it all makes sense. But when I was your age and younger, it didn't make sense and it was frightening and there were lots of questions and you didn't know. In retrospect, it's like, what were you, it's so clear. So there's that tension to start off with. When I started, I didn't have such a thing as protected time, and I've never really thought of it that way. I started doing a lot of things, which is probably a common denominator. It's not that I had one job, but I had 5 sub jobs that added up to one job. Some of those jobs I liked, and some of them I didn't like, but I needed them to pay the bills, to make my salary, to do what I needed to do. And in each of those jobs, I learned something and was open to it. It wasn't that I was counting the days to be out of those jobs, but I was looking ahead, thinking of what might happen instead. And what is it that I wanted to do? So piece of advice 1 would be get ready to do lots of things, not all of which you will love day 1, but that's how you get started. And then I found I didn't see myself at all as a researcher. I had no interest in research, period. I was a clinician educator. But I started to see some small opportunities for either funding or, more importantly than funding, to join teams of researchers where my particular expertise could be useful. So I joined a team doing psychopharmacology research. It was an incredibly helpful way to get into academics, even though I found very quickly that I didn't like doing clinical trials, for example. But meeting people, starting to learn some skills led to this funding opportunity, that other funding opportunity. And funding is what translated into protected time, where I could really start devising. It made me actually very nervous, I have to tell you, because to have protected time to me remains scary. What do you do with all that free time? Think big ideas? I don't, I'm kind of a man of action, but I guess that I started using it. I had a little bit of time to think, and I had time to recognize the things that I was not good at, the things that I didn't have. So I did not have research chops. I did not have research methodology. I didn't understand statistics. There were lots of lacks, and I was fortunate enough to pursue some training. I got a master's in public health here at Yale that was focused really on epidemiology and biostatistics. And it gave me a good sense, a comfort, not only in understanding statistics, but running all my statistics. I've never used a statistician. I've always run my statistics, which I think is really great. As I say, I found that the psychopharm world was not for me, and I meandered and I wandered the desert, and I could tell you all the different stops that I did. But I started increasing those things that I really liked, and I really liked clinical work. I really liked clinical work in an inpatient unit, and I've continued doing it. So for the past 25 years, I've been doing inpatient child psychiatry and loving it. It nurtures me. It's very enriching. And then finding at some point that doing that all the time was also not healthy and not good, and starting to make a little bit of a wedge with some of my research interests. My career has been a little bit unusual in that some of my research really started with being an editor, or that was an inflection point when I became editor of JCAP for 10 years. And although I wasn't doing research those years, I was as close to research as you can be, being an editor. So I really got a strong sense of that. And when the editorship stopped, I had this hole in my life. What do I do with it? And I started filling it now with real research of my own, with questions of my own. And the research was very different from the idea that I had from research. It wasn't running statistics. It wasn't collecting, biological data. It was what I love doing, which is talking to people, talking to patients and families. And I found that there's this crazy thing called qualitative methods that we don't do enough of. That was a perfect fit for my interest, my background. I've always been interested in literature and the written word. And essentially all my research now is in qualitative methods. And it has been a fantastic way not only of learning, of producing, but also getting people excited about it. And now we have a whole group of people doing this work. So I think that might be a good summary of my career trajectory.
That's a great summary. Thank you so much. And yeah, one of the things I find really interesting about your research focus is because as you said yourself, right, like pharmacology and especially biological psychiatry, and I mean, not to diminish those fields, they're super important. And I'm I'm much more an epidemiology-based researcher than anything else. But I think it was not only also until I started doing this child and adolescent psychiatry training that I kind of, found mixed methods research. And also here in our group, we have 2 very strong qualitative researchers, and how actually, there is a whole world of very incredible things that you can do within qualitative research. And you have, well, a lot on that now, and this is really incredible. And on that topic, you recently published some really interesting like randomized control trials on like the short video interventions your group did with patients. And I just wanted to ask like, yeah, where that idea came from and how was kind of doing a randomized control trial integrating patients' views as well, because I think it's especially the one that you did with transgender patients, that was really cool. Yeah.
No, thank you for asking. So the first thing that I have to say is that this is not my brainchild. I'm just joining for a very wonderful ride with incredible colleagues. The key brains behind the operation is my dear friend and colleague Doron Amsalem. He is an Israeli child psychiatrist now practicing in the States and Colombia, and it's really his baby. And more recently, we've had another brilliant collaborator in Stanford, Maya, who has done some of those illustrations. But the principle is very simple. We know that kids are online all the time and they're on their phone all the time. So we want to get into them. We know that they're doing Instagram all the time. So we've developed these videos that started being, now I would say they're long, 90 seconds long. By now we're down to 45 seconds and whatnot. And we started doing them in the lab. And by the lab, I mean crowdsourcing, meaning that we pay a company, an Amazon outfit. You say, recruit for me, 3,000 or however many you want individuals. You don't know who they are, but you will pay them $2, $3 for 3 minutes of their time to see a video and fill a questionnaire. So very quickly, we can get huge sample sizes. And when I say very quickly, in 3 days, we can get 3,000 subjects and we get all these data that are clean, et cetera. And then if we randomize to, let's say, seeing depressed versus not depressed, or depressed in a transgender youth versus a non-transgender youth, or in a Black youth versus a non-Black youth. We've done all these permutations, but it's always very similar. We randomly assign to this large number of individuals. And with those samples, we have statistical ability to really look at stuff in a detailed way. It started with these professionally made videos. Then we've moved, as I said, to selfie videos. We did studies showing that selfies are just as good as the other ones. And with Maya's work, we have included these wonderful cartoons. They're very simple cartoons, but very moving, very touching about transgender family acceptance or non-acceptance. The study that we're about to launch in this line with Doron and Maya is about the impact of the legislative changes that we have seen in the US and the transphobia and other things that we've seen in the US to see how that has changed over time. Sadly, we kind of know how this will go, but this is a kind of data that we are hopeful can inform policy or hopefully policy reversals.
That's really fantastic and really timely as well. We just had last week here in the UK as well, like a Supreme Court ruling that kind of was considered a very large like backtrack in transgender rights, because like the Supreme Court understood that you can only, like, women are only people who were biologically born female. And yeah, we're also in a bit of a moment where some policies might be reversed as well. So I always find it's really important how like our research can inform policy and can help certain groups. And on that note as well, one thing I find really amazing about our trajectory is that, as you said, like you were able with time to tailor like your career to your research interests. So as you said, like in the beginning, you did a bit of everything and you gained breadth and experience. And with time and more seniority, you were able to dedicate yourself to qualitative research and also inpatient psychiatry, which is what you love. And I wanted to ask you, like, it's also because I know you mentor lots of trainees in Yale. What advice do you give to your trainees when they are like beginning and they're still kind of trying to find their research niche and their research focus, and then like how to navigate that alongside the competitive priorities of residency and the long hours and everything?
Yeah. By the way, I need to amend the record by saying I was referring just to Maya. This is Dr. Maya Adam, A-D-A-M, who is our collaborator in Stanford. So to answer your question, first of all, it takes time. It's the rare instance where someone can come in from the get-go and have a clear sense of where they're going. It's not impossible at all, but I would say that it's the exception rather than the rule. You had mentioned the Solnick program that we have. We have a program for trainees who we recruit fresh out of medical school into a 6-year program to do not only child psychiatry and psychiatry, but specifically to do research. Many of those individuals come in already with research that they can pursue or continue to pursuing. The students who we've recruited from Yale, who may have already had some track record within Yale, they have it easier in a way because they have this they already have a lab or a mentor or whatever. Someone who may have a big product portfolio, but coming from another institution, they will still need a little bit of time. But for most people, it doesn't work that way. It certainly wasn't that way for me. I think that for most people, you have ideas that are somewhat inchoate and developing, and you try certain things. At least in the United States, in the 2 years of child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship, it's hard to really do like a research with a capital R project. And to focus just on that can be dispiriting because it's just very hard. So I think that things that are realistic and the things that I would encourage as part of a well-balanced diet in this direction would be try to join a group or groups, as I said, if you can, just to, join the calls, join the lab meetings, just learn whatever you can. You don't need to go and get married to that group. You might want to go and attend 10 different groups and see which ones start feeling right for you. So that would be one. The other is that if you like topic X and Professor Y, you might say, I don't have a huge amount of time, but you've already collected tons of data. Is there one little piece of the data that I could play around with and take as my own, under your guidance? So you don't need to be collecting from scratch. So that would be point number 2. Point number 3, and this one I did, is write. No matter if you're doing research or not, just write. Because writing will beget writing, publishing will beget publishing. And even if you're not doing high science, publishing will teach you a lot. So when I look at my publication trajectory, I published a ton of book reviews before I started writing stuff. I published tons of book reviews in academic journals. Then I became the book review editor for JCAP. Then I became the editor for JCAP. So that was one venue that worked for me. So, and I'm a big fan of book reviews because you can learn a lot about a topic very quickly, put your touch on it, not just say chapter 1, chapter 2 is about this and that, but really think in concert with the book. It doesn't have to be a book review. You could write letters to the editor about a big fancy study that you found and write something intelligent. There are many things where you can contribute. And again, be very aware that it will take time. Case reports, which are maligned and, they're complicated, but case reports well done can also be a way to do it. Now there's some journals that are specific about case reports. If you can join a project that is working towards a more formal product, that is wonderful. I take great pride and it gives me great joy that every single one of my papers has medical students and residents and fellows as co-authors, usually as first, second, and third, and fourth, and fifth. So join those groups, find someone who is generative and will be willing to share. So those would be, there's one more piece of concrete advice, which would be seek funding opportunities. This sounds easy, but it's not necessarily easy. In the American Academy, for example, we have grants at every level of training, medical student, resident, fellow, young faculty. I'm sure that the European, the British, ACAPOP, subspecialty specific things, find those funding opportunities to go to a meeting, to meet people, to see if you can join them for some time. Those are the things that will not make you a researcher, but they will maximize your chances of becoming one.
Yeah, no, those are also like excellent advice, like 100%. And I think, and I saw myself in so many advice you just gave, but just to share an anecdote with the audience as well, this is kind of advice I wish I had received before I started my research master's, because I took a year out to do this research master's, which I've now completed, and it was great, and I don't regret it in the slightest. But I remember when I was a medical student, you have this, I also knew I wanted to do psychiatry, and you have this big aspirations, especially if you like research, you think that in your master's thesis you're gonna run a clinical trial and you're gonna do that big research of an but realistically, I don't want to kill anyone's dreams, but you're not doing that in a year or 1 year with very little funding. Realistically, the tip you gave about doing secondary data analysis and joining an already established project, which is what I did, but not knowing that was the right way to do it. And I was very lucky in that regard. That's what worked, because also especially, in the US, if you want to do any kind of research with patients, you will have to go through IRB. IRBs take time. That's not to say it's impossible. It's super possible, but it's usually a PhD project or a project for a large grant. And if you are the motivation is great. But as you said, it's really about like being strategic about the opportunities you join and making the most out of them. But you gave amazing advice, Professor Martin. Thank you so much. And I think one last question, actually, if that's okay with you. Would like in the beginning of the podcast, we talked a lot about the generation to generation motto, and it's also a motto I hold dearly. Do you feel hopeful about the next generation? And if you had like, one piece of advice for the future generation of child and adolescent psychiatrists, researchers or not, what would it be?
Yeah, no, I am very, very optimistic and hopeful. I think that the pipeline that we are seeing is spectacular. We are seeing more and more people going into the field. We've seen numbers here at Yale of medical students interested in psychiatry and child psychiatry that I've never seen. The talent, the intellect, the curiosity that you all bring is extraordinary. The tools at your disposal compared to the abacus that we use in my generation, it's just remarkable, right? It's just remarkable. So I guess that my advice would be leverage those technologies, make use of those technologies, whether it's AI, whether it's genetics, or it's whatever it is, but stay close to the patient. That has been the formula that has worked for me. If I was just doing statistics at 30,000 feet, I didn't know what I was talking about. When I came back and found an altitude that allowed me the granularity of patient care, that was good. When you think I mentioned AI, but with AI, you're going to have, infinite samples and you can do everything, but that's not enough. At the end of the day, you're going to need to have those human values and that human connection to your patients, to the families, to all that we serve, to each other. So remaining true to those and not getting too seduced by the beauty of AI or whatever it is. Technology du jour.
Oh, that's great advice. Just because of the AI thing, and I was thinking a lot about it the other day, because with the new generative models, we know that video generation is advancing super quickly. We're not there yet, but we're going to be very soon. And lots of people were talking about like replacing maybe even a cognitive behavioral therapist, for example. And that to me, I hope, and I know this is going to come, there will come the day that there will be an AI therapist. And I think that's something Donald Cohen also talks a lot about, right? Like, as you said, in the granularity of patient care, there will always be the report, and that report is therapeutic in itself. And I mean, that's my hope that psychiatry is not extinguished by AI, but I don't know, like, I might be wrong, and in 10 years' time, we might be all replaced, but I hope we're not.
I think, just to say one thing, the CBT therapist through AI, that's not in the future. That's already in the past. That's in the present. That's happening in China at a, huge rate. And it's been very good because rates of going to therapy have been very poor. And suddenly there are millions of people who are getting CBT and it's working well. So I think it's coming and it will come. But rather than saying we're going to be replaced, is how are we going to leverage that into our armamentarium? We know we will never be enough. Right? I mean, there will never be enough. So if I was in China and suddenly 1 million children were getting CBT through their apps, I would say, thank God, how can I then help them? How can I bring my rapport? And because there's no other way of reaching those numbers. So that would be, I'm hopeful again about all of these technologies.
Well, that's actually a good remark. And yeah, it's kind of reality. It's wishful thinking of myself to say that it's really in the future when it's already in the present. But hopefully, as you said, I think there will always be space for like doctor-patient interaction.
I mean, I'm an avatar of Andrés Martin, and I've, made you believe that he is a real person. But, you saw the real Andrés Martin, then you would see what real rapport is like.
On that note, well, thank you so much, Professor Martin, for your time today and for chatting with us. And you've given a myriad of amazing advice to future child and adolescent psychiatry trainees. And I'm very, very thankful. So I hope I'll see you around at ASCAP because I will be there. And I saw you're one of the keynote speakers.
There. Yep, I will be there.
Okay.
See you in Strasbourg.
See you in Strasbourg, Professor. Bye-bye. Thank you so much, Professor Martin. That was really interesting. We were honored to have you here today in our podcast. And so our producer, Matt, has just reminded me that Professor Martin was talking about his work with transgender youth, and ACAM has a webinar on transgender and non-binary youth called Supporting Families. This is a really important topic because supporting families of transgender and non-binary youth is crucial for positive mental health outcomes. And so if you're interested and if you want to know more about this, you can join Sabra Katz-Weiss that will be leading this leading this webinar. She's a leading researcher on LGBTQ plus health and family functioning. So you can join this fascinating session on the 15th of July. And next week, I'll be talking to Professor Giovanni Salum. He's the Global Vice President of Child Mind, and he's also a preeminent researcher in global mental health. And we're going to be talking about research careers, policy, and how to make a global mental health impact. Okay,